There is a version of you that stayed too long. Maybe it was a job, maybe a relationship, a business idea, a friendship that had quietly stopped being one. You knew, somewhere underneath the daily motion of it, that something had shifted. And still you stayed. Not because you were foolish, because you were told your whole life that staying was the whole point. Think of the person you know who worked the hardest, not the smartest, not the most talented, the hardest, the one who showed up early, left late, said yes to everything, and never once complained about the cost. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. Is that person actually the one who ended up ahead? Often they aren't. This isn't a story about laziness winning over effort. It's stranger than that. Somewhere along the way, many of the hardest workers become the most stuck workers, trapped inside a version of effort that has stopped producing anything except more effort. They mistake motion for progress. They mistake endurance for wisdom. And by the time they notice, years have gone into a direction that was wrong from the beginning. Here is the uncomfortable question underneath all of this. What if the people who go furthest in life aren't the ones who never quit, but the ones who quit at exactly the right moment, for exactly the right reasons, before everyone else even realized it was time? We don't like this idea. We've built an entire culture around its opposite. Quitting is treated as a character flaw, a moral failure, a story we tell children to avoid. Persistence gets the biographies, the commencement speeches, the inspirational posters. Nobody frames a poster that says, "She left when it stopped making sense." And yet, quietly, almost invisibly, some of the most consequential decisions in successful lives are decisions to stop. Not to stop trying, not to stop growing, but to stop pouring energy into something that has already told you in a dozen small ways that it's over. The problem is that most people can't tell the difference between a moment that requires more effort and a moment that requires an exit. Both moments feel identical from the inside. Both feel hard. Both feel like giving up would be easier. And so people default to the story that sounds noblest. Keep going, even when everything around them is quietly signaling otherwise. This audiobook is not going to tell you to quit more. That would be just as reckless as telling you to never quit at all. Instead, it's going to do something more useful. It's going to help you notice what successful people seem to sense almost instinctively. The difference between a wall you're supposed to push through and a door you're supposed to walk out of. Later, we'll bring these ideas together into a single practical way of reading your own life, a model for recognizing long before anyone else does when a threshold has quietly been crossed. Not a checklist, a way of seeing. For now, consider this. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a version of the question this audiobook is really asking. Not, should I quit? That's too simple, and usually the wrong question anyway. The real question is quieter and harder to sit with. What am I still doing out of hope? And what am I still doing out of habit? Keep that question nearby. We're about to spend the next hour learning how to tell the two apart. There's a phrase almost everyone has heard, usually at the exact moment they least wanted to hear it. Winners never quit, and quitters never win. It sounds true. It has the rhythm of wisdom. It's been printed on locker room walls, whispered by coaches, embroidered onto motivational posters in break rooms where people are, ironically, dying to leave. And for a long time, nobody questioned it, because questioning it felt like admitting weakness. But notice something strange about that phrase. It isn't actually a description of how successful people behave. It's a description of how we want to feel about effort. It flatters the person hearing it. You're not struggling, you're proving something, and in doing so, it quietly removes their permission to ask a much more important question: proving something to whom and at what cost? Where did this belief come from? Not from careful observation of how success actually works. It came from somewhere more emotional, from parents trying to keep children in school, coaches trying to keep athletes on the field, cultures trying to keep workers at their posts during difficult seasons. Persistence, as a value, was never really about individual well-being. It was about compliance. A persistent person is a predictable person. A predictable person is easy to manage. That's not a conspiracy. It's simply how incentives quietly shape the stories a culture tells itself. And once a story like "never quit" becomes embedded deeply enough, it stops being treated as advice. It becomes treated as identity. To quit isn't just to make a decision anymore. It's to become a certain kind of person. A quitter. The word itself does something sly. It turns an action into a permanent label, as if leaving one situation defines your character everywhere else. This is where the real damage happens, because once quitting becomes identity rather than strategy, people stop evaluating situations on their merits. They stop asking, "Is this still working?" and start asking, "What would it mean about me if I stopped?" Those are two entirely different questions, and only one of them has anything to do with reality. Picture two employees at the same failing company. Both sense correctly that the business is heading nowhere. One leaves within the year, joins a growing company, and within 3 years is running a department. The other stays for 6 more years out of loyalty, convinced that leaving would mean the last 6 years were wasted. When the company finally collapses, that employee doesn't just lose a job. They lose 6 years they could never have back, chasing a version of loyalty that was never actually reciprocated. From the outside, we'd say the first person made the smarter move, but notice what we'd likely have said about them at the time they left: that they gave up too early, that they didn't have what it takes, that real professionals stick it out. The cult of persistence doesn't just punish people after the fact, it actively discourages the very decision that would have saved them in real time, while it's still possible to act on it. This is the quiet cost of believing that endurance is always a virtue. It removes your ability to tell the difference between a challenge worth enduring and a decline worth escaping. Both feel like hardship. Only one of them is actually leading somewhere. There's a particular kind of intelligent person who suffers from this most. Not the reckless, not the lazy, the conscientious. The kind of person who takes commitment seriously, who feels a genuine obligation to see things through, who was praised early in life for not giving up. That praise becomes a filter through which every future decision gets processed. Stopping starts to feel less like a strategic choice and more like a betrayal of who they believe themselves to be. And so they stay. Not because staying is working, because staying is who they think they are. This is the first thing worth noticing quietly before anything else. The belief that persistence is always noble isn't a fact about the world. It's a story, a useful one in certain seasons, a dangerous one in others. And like any story, its power comes from never being questioned. The people who eventually learn to quit well aren't the ones who abandon that story completely. They're the ones who stop treating it as a rule and start treating it as one tool among several. They learn to ask a different question than, "Should I keep going?" They learn to ask something closer to, "Is this still costing me more than it's paying me back?" That question sounds simple. It isn't. Because the real difficulty, as we're about to see, has very little to do with logic, and almost everything to do with what the mind does the moment it senses loss. Imagine two versions of the same person standing at the same fork in the road, facing the exact same set of facts about the future. In one version, they've invested nothing yet. No time, no money, no years of their life. In the other, they've invested 5 years, all their savings, and a piece of their identity. Logically, the facts about the future are identical in both cases. Whatever happens next has nothing to do with what already happened. And yet, almost nobody treats these two situations the same way. The second version of that person is far more likely to keep going, even when the evidence says they shouldn't. This isn't a flaw unique to a few unlucky people. It's a wiring pattern shared by nearly everyone, and it has a name: The sunk cost effect. The mind treats past investment as if it were a debt that must be honored rather than what it actually is: money, time, or effort that is already gone regardless of what happens next. Here's the strange part. The moment you've spent something, a year of your life, a chunk of savings, an ounce of your reputation, that resource no longer exists to be saved. It's spent. The only real question left is what you do with what remains. But the mind doesn't experience it that way. It experiences the thought of walking away as a second loss stacked on top of the first, and something in us will do almost anything to avoid feeling that. This is why so many failing projects get more funding instead of less, why struggling relationships get another year instead of an honest conversation, why businesses that have quietly stopped working keep receiving the owner's last reserves of energy and money long after any outside observer could see the direction things were heading. The people involved aren't stupid. They're responding to a very old, very human aversion to admitting that something already given cannot be gotten back. There's a particular kind of pain in this that rarely gets named directly. It isn't the pain of failure, it's the pain of retroactive meaning. If I quit now, some part of the mind whispers, then everything I already did meant nothing. That sentence feels unbearable, so the mind avoids it the only way it knows how, by manufacturing reasons to continue, so that the past can go on meaning something a little longer. But here's what's easy to miss in that moment. The past already happened. It already has whatever meaning it has. 5 years spent building a business that ultimately closes were not 5 wasted years. They were 5 years in which you learned exactly what doesn't work, what your limits are, what markets respond to, who you become under pressure. That knowledge doesn't disappear the day you close the doors. What disappears, if you stay too long, is everything that could have come next. This is worth sitting with because it reframes the entire fear. The choice was never really between the past meant something and the past meant nothing. It was always between two futures, one where you carry what you learned into something new and one where you keep feeding a version of the past that has already finished teaching you anything. There's a useful, almost clinical test for separating a genuine setback from a sunk cost trap. Ask, if I were arriving at this decision today with no history here at all, knowing everything I now know, would I choose to start this? If the honest answer is no, then what's keeping you isn't strategy. It's the debt the mind imagines it owes to its own past effort, a debt that in reality was never owed to anyone. This doesn't mean every difficulty is a sign to leave. Some of the most valuable outcomes in life come from pushing through a hard stretch that later proves temporary. The danger isn't effort itself. The danger is effort that has quietly detached from any evidence that it's working, kept alive only by the fear of what its absence would mean about everything that came before. And this is where the sunk cost trap connects to something even deeper than logic, because for many people, the resistance to quitting isn't really about the money or the time at all. It's about who they'd have to become if they stopped. When a path has been walked long enough, it stops feeling like something you're doing. It starts feeling like something you are. That's the trap waiting in the next room. There's a moment that happens to almost everyone who stays in something long enough, and it happens so gradually that most people never notice it occurring. At some point, a person stops doing a thing and starts being it. A lawyer who once practiced law becomes quietly a lawyer, full stop, no verb attached. A founder who once started a company becomes, in their own mind and everyone else's, the company itself. A partner in a difficult relationship stops thinking of themselves as someone in a relationship and starts thinking of themselves as someone's partner, as if the role had replaced the person underneath it. This shift feels harmless. In many ways, it even feels like commitment, the natural result of caring enough about something to let it shape you. But it carries a hidden cost that only becomes visible at the exact moment it matters most, when the thing itself stops working. Because if you are simply doing a job, walking away from a bad one is a logistical decision. You update a resume, you have some uncomfortable conversations, you start over. But if you have become the job, if the role has fused with your sense of self, walking away doesn't feel like leaving a situation. It feels like ending a version of yourself. And almost nobody chooses that willingly, even when the situation is quietly destroying them. Psychologists have a term for this: identity fusion, the point at which a role, group, or pursuit becomes so tightly bound to a person's sense of who they are that a threat to the role registers in the body as a threat to survival. This isn't a metaphor. When people describe the fear of leaving a long-held career or a long-term relationship, they don't usually describe career or relationship problems. They describe something closer to dissolving. Who am I, if not this? This is why some of the most capable people stay in situations that are visibly, even obviously wrong for them, not because they can't see it. Often they see it more clearly than anyone else. But seeing it and acting on it require two entirely different kinds of courage. The courage to notice and the courage to survive the identity collapse that follows acting on what you noticed. Consider a mid-level executive who has spent 15 years building a reputation inside one company. She's respected, senior, embedded in every meaningful relationship the organization has. She also privately knows the company's direction no longer aligns with anything she believes in. Leaving would mean starting over somewhere she isn't senior, isn't known, isn't automatically respected. It isn't the salary that keeps her. It's the unbearable thought of becoming once again someone nobody has to listen to. This is rarely spoken about honestly, because admitting it feels like admitting vanity. But it isn't vanity. It's a basic feature of how identity works. We don't just lose position when we leave something we've fused with. We lose the specific mirror that has been reflecting a version of ourselves back to us for years. No wonder people delay that loss for as long as possible, even at real cost to their future. The way out of this trap isn't to stop caring about what you do. It's to draw a slightly different boundary around your identity. One that includes your judgment, your values, your capacity to build something, rather than the specific role you happen to be building it in right now. A person who identifies as someone who builds valuable things can leave a failing project and remain exactly who they are. A person who identifies as the founder of this specific company cannot leave without feeling that they've disappeared. This distinction sounds subtle. It isn't. It's the difference between people who can walk away from a threshold when it's crossed and people who stay attached to something long after it has stopped serving them. Not out of confusion, but out of a very real fear of losing themselves in the process. And there's one more layer to this fear that rarely gets acknowledged because it isn't private at all. It's public. Even when someone has quietly made peace with who they'd be after leaving, there's still the matter of who everyone else will think they've become. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with the work itself. It's the exhaustion of performing endurance for an audience that isn't actually paying as much attention as it feels like they are. Somewhere along the way, staying became a performance. Not consciously, not dishonestly, but quietly, the way most performances begin. Someone notices that persistence gets rewarded with respect. A colleague says, "I don't know how you do it." A parent says, "We're so proud of how hard you've worked." A friend says, "You never give up, that's what I admire about you." Each comment lands as encouragement, but stacked together over years, they form something closer to a contract nobody remembers signing. Keep enduring, and the applause continues. The trouble with this contract is that it has nothing to do with whether the thing being endured is actually still worth enduring. The applause doesn't know the difference between meaningful persistence and stubborn avoidance. It simply rewards the appearance of not stopping. And because human beings are deeply, almost helplessly responsive to social approval, that applause starts to function like a second income, one that's easy to forget you're being paid in and painful to imagine losing. This is the applause problem. The fear of quitting is rarely just about the thing itself. It's about the audience watching you decide. Think about how differently the same decision gets narrated depending on timing. A person who leaves a struggling company 2 years before it collapses is called indecisive, disloyal, unable to commit. The same person, had they stayed until the collapse and then left, would be called a survivor, someone who fought until the end. The facts of their judgment were identical, arguably better in the first case, but the story other people tell about it depends entirely on whether the ending has already been written by the time they act. Because of this, many people quietly time their decisions not around what the evidence says, but around what will be easiest to explain to others. They wait for a visible, undeniable failure before they allow themselves to leave. Not because they didn't see it coming, but because leaving before the failure is undeniable exposes them to a question they don't want to answer. How did you know, and why didn't you say something sooner? There's a quiet irony buried in this. The people who are watching and forming opinions about your decision to stay or go are almost never as invested in the outcome as you assume. They have their own lives, their own thresholds they're avoiding. The audience you're performing endurance for is, in most cases, distracted, forgetful, and far less judgmental than the version of them you've constructed in your head. And yet that constructed audience is often powerful enough to keep a person locked into a decision long after every private signal has told them otherwise. This doesn't mean other people's opinions never matter. Reputation is real, and consequences from leaving too abruptly or too visibly can be real too. But there's a difference between weighing genuine reputational cost and simply avoiding the discomfort of being seen making a hard call before it becomes an obvious one. The first is strategy. The second is fear wearing the costume of loyalty. Here's a quiet test worth asking yourself in a moment like this. If no one would ever know how long I stayed or when I left, if there were no story to tell afterward, no explanation required, would I still be here? For many people, that question is uncomfortable precisely because the honest answer is no. What's keeping them isn't the work or even the identity fused to it. It's the fear of narrating an early exit to people who in 6 months will barely remember the conversation. The most consequential quitting decisions in successful lives tend to share this trait. They were made quietly, often before there was any dramatic evidence to justify them publicly, which raises an uncomfortable question of its own. If you're waiting for a story good enough to tell other people, what exactly are you waiting to lose first? Because staying doesn't just cost energy or time, it replaces something, and that replacement is where the real price is paid. There's a kind of loss that never shows up on a balance sheet, never gets mentioned in a performance review, never announces itself the way a failure does. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic moment. It simply accumulates quietly in the space where something else could have happened, but didn't. Economists have a clean term for this: opportunity cost, the value of the next best option you didn't choose. It sounds like a technical concept, useful mostly for comparing investments or business decisions. But opportunity cost isn't really a financial idea. It's an emotional one, and most people go years without feeling its full weight because, unlike a loss, it never presents itself as an event. It only ever presents itself as an absence. Here is what makes this especially dangerous when it comes to knowing when to quit. Staying in something rarely feels like an active decision with a cost attached. It feels like the absence of a decision, the default, the safe choice, the thing that requires no explanation. Leaving, by contrast, feels enormous, deliberate, expensive, and so the mind, always looking for the path of least resistance, treats staying as if it were free. It never is. Every year spent in a job that has stopped growing you is a year not spent building something that would have. Every relationship maintained out of comfort rather than genuine connection occupies the exact space where a healthier one might have taken root. Time is the one resource that cannot be recovered once spent, and staying somewhere that has quietly stopped serving you doesn't preserve that time. It spends it just as surely as leaving would, only without anything to show for the expense. This is why the people who learn to quit well develop a particular kind of vision, the ability to see the empty space next to the thing they're doing, not just the thing itself. They ask, not only is this working, but what is this preventing? What decision? What opportunity, what version of my life is quietly unable to exist because this one is still occupying the space? Consider someone who spends 4 years in a job that offers stability but no real growth. If you asked them directly whether the job is costing them anything, most would say no. After all, they're being paid. Nothing bad is happening. But zoom out 4 years and compare them to a version of themselves who spent that same window in a role that stretched their skills, expanded their network, and compounded their expertise. The difference between those two people isn't visible in any single week. It becomes undeniable only in hindsight, by which point the 4 years are already gone. This is precisely what makes opportunity cost so easy to ignore in the moment and so painful to recognize later. It doesn't announce itself through pain. It announces itself through comparison, and comparison usually only becomes possible once it's too late to reclaim what was lost. There's a useful shift in thinking here, one that separates people who quit wisely from people who quit either too rashly or not at all. Instead of asking, is this bad enough to leave? They learn to ask, is this good enough to be the best use of what I have left? Not what I have left in some abstract, unlimited sense, what I have left specifically. A finite number of years at a certain level of energy, a finite number of chances to build certain kinds of relationships, a finite window in which certain risks are still available to take. This reframing changes the entire emotional weight of staying. Staying is no longer neutral. It is an active choice to spend a limited resource on this, instead of on the version of your life that would have existed otherwise. Once that becomes visible, the decision to leave something that's quietly draining you stops feeling like abandonment. It starts feeling like stewardship, taking responsibility for a resource you will never get back. None of this means every discomfort signals a wrong path. Growth often looks identical to decline in its early stages. Both feel hard, both cost energy, both ask more of you than you'd prefer to give. The real skill, the one that separates people who leave too early or too late from those who leave at exactly the right moment, is learning to read the difference between the two. And that skill has a shape. It can be named. There's a question almost everyone eventually asks themselves at some low point in a difficult pursuit. Is this the hard part before the breakthrough, or is this simply the wrong path? It's a fair question, and it's also one of the most difficult questions a person can ask themselves honestly, because both possibilities feel exactly the same from the inside. Both involve doubt. Both involve exhaustion. Both involve moments where quitting seems like the obvious, sane choice. If the feeling itself can't tell you the answer, something else has to. What separates people who navigate this well from people who don't isn't confidence, and it isn't intuition in the mystical sense. It's that they've learned, often through painful trial and error, to look past the feeling and toward a small set of concrete signals. Signals that don't rely on mood, morale, or how tired they happen to be on a given Tuesday. The first signal is the direction of the trend, not the current position. A person struggling in month 2 of a new business and a person struggling in month 2 of a business that has been declining for 2 years can feel identically discouraged. But one of them is early in an upward climb that simply hasn't paid off yet. The other is watching a slow decline they've mistaken for a plateau. The question worth asking isn't how hard is this right now, but compared to 6 months ago, is the trajectory improving, flat, or worsening, regardless of how it feels today? The second signal is whether effort is still producing proportional results. Growth, real growth, tends to reward increased effort with increased output, even if that output lags behind the effort by some uncomfortable stretch of time. Decline behaves differently. In genuine decline, additional effort increasingly buys less and less. The same hours produce diminishing returns, as if pouring water into a container with a widening crack. When doubling your effort stops moving the needle at all, that isn't a sign to push harder. It's a sign the container itself has changed. The third signal is whether the difficulty is teaching you something you didn't know, or simply repeating a lesson you've already learned. Genuine growth periods are full of new information, new skills, new mistakes, new understanding of what doesn't work. Situations worth leaving tend to feel eerily repetitive, the same conflict resurfacing in slightly different clothing, the same ceiling reappearing no matter how many times you've already hit it. If a year has passed and the lessons feel identical to the ones from the year before, the situation has likely stopped teaching and started merely repeating. The fourth signal, and perhaps the quietest one, is whether your private reaction to good outcomes has changed. This is easy to miss because it doesn't show up in performance metrics or trend lines. It shows up in a small, honest moment. When something goes right and instead of feeling relief or satisfaction, a person feels nothing, or worse, a flicker of resentment that they now have to keep going. That reaction isn't laziness, it's information. It's the mind quietly reporting that the reward system attached to this pursuit has broken, even if the pursuit itself is technically still functioning. None of these 4 signals on its own is proof of anything. A single bad month doesn't mean a downward trend. One unrewarded effort doesn't mean the system is broken. The value of these signals comes from their accumulation, the way real thresholds tend to announce themselves, not through one dramatic sign, but through a quiet convergence of several small ones, all pointing the same direction over enough time to rule out coincidence. This is the discipline that separates people who quit wisely from people who quit reactively or not at all. They don't wait for a single catastrophic event to justify leaving, and they don't leave the moment things get uncomfortable. They watch the pattern. They let the evidence accumulate, and when several of these signals align, worsening trend, diminishing returns, repeated lessons, a hollowed-out sense of reward, they treat that convergence as what it actually is. Not a feeling to be second-guessed, but information to be trusted. The people who seem to know exactly when to quit are rarely more emotionally detached than anyone else. They've simply learned to separate the noise of a hard day from the signal of a wrong direction. And once you can see those signals clearly, something remarkable happens. Quitting stops feeling like collapse and starts looking like something else entirely. A decision made on purpose, ahead of time, by someone who was paying closer attention than everyone else in the room. There's an assumption buried inside the word quitting that almost nobody questions, that it happens at the end, that it's a final act, a surrender, the last thing you do after everything else has already failed. But the people who leave, rarely experience it that way. For them, leaving isn't the end of a story, it's the deliberate beginning of the next one, planned, timed, and executed with the same seriousness most people reserve only for starting something new. Consider a mid-career editor at a well-known publishing house. For years, she'd watched the industry shift under her feet. Smaller budgets, shrinking teams, less appetite for the kind of ambitious non-fiction she'd built her reputation on. She wasn't failing. By every visible measure, she was succeeding, respected, promoted, secure. But she'd started noticing the signals. Flat trajectory, diminishing creative reward, the same institutional battles resurfacing year after year with no new lessons attached. Instead of waiting for a crisis to force her hand, she did something quieter and far less dramatic. She spent 18 months building relationships outside the company, writing on the side, understanding exactly what a transition would require before she needed it. When she finally left, it looked to outsiders like a sudden, bold decision. It wasn't. It was the final, visible step of a process that had been running privately for a year and a half. This is the defining trait of a strategic exit. By the time it becomes visible, it has already been decided. The dramatic seeming moment, the resignation, the announcement, the closing of the business, isn't actually the decision. It's simply the point where a private decision, made earlier and more calmly, becomes public. This distinction matters because it reframes what quitting actually requires. Reactive quitting happens under pressure, usually after something has already gone wrong enough to force the issue. It's understandable, sometimes even necessary, but it rarely leaves room for preparation. Strategic quitting happens earlier, quieter, while things are still functioning well enough that leaving is a choice rather than an escape. It requires exactly the kind of self-awareness explored in the last chapter, noticing the signals before they become undeniable to everyone else. There's a reason this feels counterintuitive. Leaving while things still look fine from the outside can feel almost dishonest, as if you're abandoning something that hasn't technically failed yet. But this is precisely where the earlier ideas in this book converge. The applause problem tells us we wait for visible failure because it's easier to explain. The sunk cost trap tells us we wait because leaving early makes past effort feel wasted. Identity fusion tells us we wait because leaving means losing a version of ourselves. None of these are reasons to stay. They're simply reasons the decision feels harder than it needs to be. The strategic exit doesn't ignore these forces. It works with them deliberately ahead of time. It treats leaving the way a careful builder treats demolition, not as chaos, but as controlled, planned, and timed to minimize damage while maximizing what can be salvaged and carried forward. This shows up across very different kinds of decisions. An entrepreneur who senses her market has fundamentally changed doesn't wait until the business collapses to explore alternatives. She starts testing a new direction quietly, on the side, long before she needs to. An employee who recognizes his role has plateaued doesn't wait for a layoff to start building skills elsewhere. He treats the current job as a runway rather than a destination, using its remaining stability to fund the transition. In both cases, the exit isn't a reaction to failure. It's a response to information acted on while there's still time to act well. What makes this hard isn't identifying the right moment. As the previous chapter showed, the signals are learnable. What makes it hard is tolerating the discomfort of leaving before certainty arrives, because certainty, by definition, only shows up once it's too late to act on it gracefully. Waiting for undeniable proof that something is over means waiting until the exit has already become expensive. This is the quiet skill underneath everything explored so far, not the willingness to quit. Nearly everyone is willing to quit once things have clearly fallen apart. The rarer skill is the willingness to quit before that, to trust a pattern of small signals over the comfort of an unresolved feeling, and to treat leaving not as an admission that something failed, but as evidence that you were paying close enough attention to notice before anyone else did. That skill has a shape. It's time to put the whole picture together. Everything explored so far has been circling one underlying pattern, approached from different angles: psychological, social, financial, existential. It's time to see it as a single, unified whole. Call it the threshold model, not because it's complicated, but because of what a threshold actually is. Not a wall and not a cliff, but a point of transition, the exact place where continuing and leaving stop being equally reasonable, and one clearly becomes wiser than the other. Most people cross thresholds without noticing because they're looking for a dramatic sign instead of a quiet convergence. The model rests on 4 signals, each one explored earlier as its own idea, now understood as parts of a single instrument. The first is trajectory, not how something feels today, but where it has been heading over time, improving, flat, or declining. A threshold rarely announces itself in a single bad week. It reveals itself in a pattern, visible only when you stop measuring your situation moment to moment and start measuring it season to season. The second is return on effort. Growth rewards increased input with increased output, even on a delay. Decline quietly breaks that relationship so that more effort produces less and less. When this happens consistently, it's not a sign to try harder. It's a sign the underlying system has changed beneath you. The third is the learning curve. Situations worth staying in keep teaching you something new. Situations worth leaving tend to repeat the same lesson in different disguises, long after you've already understood it. A ceiling you keep hitting isn't a challenge anymore. It's information. The fourth is emotional return. The quiet, honest check of what happens inside you when things go well. Genuine progress still feels like something, even amid difficulty. When success itself stops registering as anything but relief that it's over, the reward system attached to the pursuit has already broken, whether or not the pursuit is technically still functioning. No single signal alone marks a threshold. A person can hit a temporary ceiling while trajectory is still rising. A person can feel emotionally flat during one hard month inside an otherwise healthy path. The model isn't a trigger to react to any one of these in isolation. It's a pattern to watch for their convergence, the moment when several of these signals align over enough time to rule out a bad week, a bad quarter, an ordinary rough patch. This is what separates the threshold model from both extremes explored throughout this book. It isn't the cult of persistence, which treats every difficulty as something to push through regardless of evidence. And it isn't reactive quitting, which abandons things the moment they become uncomfortable, without waiting to see whether the discomfort is temporary or structural. It sits between those two failures, asking for something harder than either: patient observation, followed by decisive action once the pattern is clear. What makes this model quietly powerful is that it removes the need for certainty before acting. You will rarely get a clean, undeniable signal that a threshold has been crossed. By the time that arrives, as we've seen, the cost of waiting has usually already been paid. The threshold model replaces the search for certainty with a search for convergence, a lower, more honest bar, but one that can actually be applied while there's still time to act well. This is also where the earlier ideas in this book stop being separate obstacles and reveal themselves as a single resistance working from different directions. The sunk cost trap keeps you attached to trajectory that's already declining, because leaving feels like wasting what's already spent. Identity fusion keeps you blind to your own diminishing returns, because the role has become indistinguishable from the self. The applause problem keeps you waiting for undeniable failure, because an early exit is harder to explain than a late one. And opportunity cost quietly grows in the background the entire time, invisible until measured against what could have existed instead. The threshold model doesn't eliminate any of these forces. Nothing can. What it offers instead is a way to see past them, a set of signals sturdy enough to notice even when everything else in you is pulling toward one more month, one more year, one more chance to prove that leaving would have been the wrong call. The people who seem to know exactly when to quit were never simply braver than everyone else. They were watching more carefully for the right things long before the moment arrived. Go back for a moment to the person we started with, the one who stayed too long. The job, the relationship, the project that had quietly stopped being what it once was. At the beginning, the question was simple, almost unfair. Why didn't they leave sooner? By now, the question doesn't feel simple anymore. It feels familiar, because somewhere across the last hour, that person stopped being a stranger and started looking a little like you, or someone you know, or a version of yourself from a few years back who was doing exactly what everyone told them was right, enduring, committing, refusing to give up, without anyone ever teaching them how to tell the difference between endurance that builds something and endurance that simply delays the inevitable. That's the real transformation this book was quietly working toward, not a new opinion about quitting, a new relationship with it. Persistence was never the villain in this story. Effort, commitment, showing up when things are hard, these remain some of the most valuable things a person can offer. But they were never meant to be unconditional. They were meant to be aimed. And aim requires the ability to occasionally stop, look clearly at where the effort is landing, and adjust course before the cost of not adjusting becomes unbearable. What separates people who build extraordinary lives from people who simply work extraordinarily hard was never the presence of struggle. Everyone struggles. What separates them is the quiet, learnable skill of reading their own situation honestly. Trajectory, return on effort, the shape of what they're still learning, the shape of what they still feel, and trusting that pattern over the noise of identity, applause, and sunk cost, all of which will always argue for staying exactly where you are. You will not always get this right. No framework guarantees that. There will be thresholds you cross too early, out of impatience, and thresholds you cross too late, out of fear. That's not a failure of the model. That's simply what it means to make real decisions with incomplete information, the way every person who has ever built something worthwhile has had to. What changes once you've internalized this isn't your certainty, it's your posture. You stop treating every difficult season as a referendum on whether you should quit. You stop mistaking discomfort for evidence and stillness for peace. You start watching, patiently, for the signals that actually mean something. And when they align, you act, not out of panic, but out of the same quiet clarity that has always defined people who seem to know exactly when to walk away. This is what it means to choose your battles in the truest sense of that phrase. Not to avoid difficulty, to spend your finite effort where it actually compounds, and to release it without shame from wherever it no longer does. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a threshold you already sense but haven't yet named. You don't need certainty to begin paying attention to it. You only need the willingness to ask the question this book has been quietly asking from the very first page. Not, should I quit? But something steadier, something you can return to again and again for the rest of your life. Is this still teaching me something? Or am I simply protecting what it already cost me? Once you can ask that question clearly, you'll find you already know the answer more often than you expected. You always did. You were simply waiting for permission to trust it.